Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of the podcast. Before we jump into it, just wanted to say apologies to the video viewers. We may be swapping between some static images and then live cams, as Brenda did have some internet connectivity issues. Besides that, hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode of the podcast. Hello everybody, welcome back to episode 75 of the Podcana podcast. This week, it is just myself and Brendan, as Moyen has already landed in Seattle. He is practicing furiously, no doubt. Some last minute practice for DLC Seattle. And in this week's episode, we actually have a lot of different topics to cover. The main one, of course, being Disney Lorcana Challenge Seattle predictions. Myself and Brendan are going to, give some predictions on maybe some of the most popular decks that are going to show up, maybe even a particular ink combination that we think is going to win the entire event. We're also then going to move into a tier list, ranking each of these ink color combinations based on how represented they're going to be. The next topic we'll have is also the Lorca Quest event that took place last weekend. It was a 707 player event in France that I got to cast. I think this is going to be a great event to take a look at. Did you see the general metagame? Obviously, this is a European event, so keep that in mind. It's going to be maybe a little bit different than what the Seattle meta is going to be like. But I think it's a great event to take a look at. And, it's the biggest one that's taken place before Seattle. And then also, we finally received our Set 6 spoiler card. Brendan, are you excited? You've seen it. We're not gonna show it off yet, but are you excited to talk about this card? Yes or no?
Yeah, of course. What do you mean? I feel like I'm obligated to say that, but honestly, like, I saw it. I kind of remember what it does, which is not a great endorsement, but they cannot all be bangers. That is just simply not how it works, and especially it would be unfair if we got a banger every single time for our spoiler card. So I am happy with the one we got. I think our last set one was sweet, even though it didn't have a crazy meta impact. It did get the juices flowing. It got the brain thinking, and it ended up in a few decks. I saw it in some decks in Vegas, so I am appreciative of any spoilers they want to throw our way. This one, not quite on the same level as Mr. Mufasa.
Yeah, but we'll be getting into that one later in the episode. But to start things off, of course, we always have our spilled ink section. This is our listeners' question section. If you guys want to have your questions read out in next week's episode of the podcast, be sure to leave a comment down below this video, and then also in our Discord server. Link to the Discord is in the video description. The first comment is from @GT Glenn. They say, great to see Kawa and Kim casting the Lorca Quest in France. Good job to both. Looked like a great event. When are we going to see Kim joining the Podcana cast? I think whenever one of us is missing, we should just get Kim on every episode, honestly.
I mean, it's going to say it's like every episode these days is just a 2-man episode, so there's room in the booth here.
Yeah,
I'd
for
say.
sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, how was casting? I don't know if you guys broke it down in last week's episode, but how was casting that? Did you enjoy it? Yeah,
it was actually a lot of fun. It was a relatively well organized event. There were some technical issues, some production issues, but for the most part, it was pretty impressive. My favorite thing about that event, honestly, was there were like 3 ink color combinations that made day 2 of that event that are very, very underrepresented in the meta right now. That was a Sapphire Amethyst deck, which finished in the top 4. There was a Sapphire Amber deck that made top 32, and then a Sapphire Emerald deck that made top 64, which was super, super cool to see. We'll actually get into some of those decks maybe a little bit when we mention the event later on, but it was super fun to cast. That was my second big major unofficial event for casting Lorcana. I'm gonna keep strong. I know I've talked about it on the podcast a lot. I've really wanted to cast some DLCs and some official events, but there's always next year. We'll get there. We'll get there. I'm glad that one of us on the pod is consistently doing it, right, Brendan?
Well, kind of, because I believe that there's no reason why Kawa shouldn't be in the booth for the EU DLCs, and I saw that I saw you had some people advocating for you. You made it into the NA versus EU tournament. I just got to put the PSA out there. People got to start doing that to get you as a caster. That's how these things happen. Kind of. There's also these approval processes.
Yes.
Nobody knows how they work, and yeah, somehow I slipped through. Somebody made a mistake with the paper. But the whole problem, if you guys, obviously Kawa is interested in casting these Disney Lorcana challenges, has been for a while, and if you listen to Podcana and you're a fan of Mr. Kawa here, the number one thing you can do is leave him. Nah, you don't leave him a review, but you can write your local Disney Lorcana representative on Twitter, Ravensburg employee, anything, and let them know that's what you want to see. That's the only way that like these things actually happen and change, because there's not a lot of feedback, by the way. Like when there's a production, there's not a lot of feedback that like, how do you parse the feedback, right? You look at Twitch chat? No. When you look at YouTube comments? Not really, right? Because first of all, the VODs don't really exist, and the YouTube comments that exist for the VODs are usually heavily biased towards whatever channel is showing them. Like if we put up a VOD on Podcana of the Lorcana Challenge in Vegas, people would probably be, they'd have different opinions of different casters than if it was on like some casual channel. So what they do actually listen to is like if you write them directly, tag them on Twitter, or go walk up to them and tell them, that's how you make things happen.
Yeah, the casting scene is really interesting. It's something, I don't want to dive too deep into it, but it pretty much is, like you said, Brandon, there's not too much feedback. It's like, if you do a casting gig and you do a relatively good job, you haven't been told off about anything, there's a high chance that you'll probably be invited back to the next one, right? You're kind of locked in for a few of them for the most part.
Yeah, so NA and EU are a bit different. I know the NA approval process is, I don't know if it's, well, I assume it's much more rigorous than the EU approval process.
From what I've heard, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, for NA, and keep in mind, this is all like conjecture. None of this is fact, and I'm an idiot. But for NA, like there is legitimately, or there seems to be not a lot of people that are approved. So it's not a huge pool to pull from, and that's like the biggest. That's kind of the biggest hurdle is, can you get approved by what I believe is Disney, but whatever overseeing faculty there is, you have to be approved by that. And then I think if you get approved, like you're, and again, this is opinion based. I think if you get approved, you're pretty likely to get a shot. And then if you just like don't flub that, you're probably good, because there's just, it's not like a normal casting gig. Normal casting gig, it's relatively competitive and new people can come in, but this one, because of the way approval processes work, it's just not really the case, at least in NA. But in EU, dude, somebody's got to tell me why my boy Kawa hasn't been on the Disney Lorcana Challenge. It's just ridiculous, because I know the approval process is much easier over there.
I don't know. We'll get there someday. Like I know I'm approved by Disney to some regard, because I've gotten to do a lot of the content creator things. But like again, I've been in the caster world. I know how it works, and it's like if people do a good job, like it's more of a hassle for these companies to be like, right, let's get someone in, let's do something new. You know what I mean? It's especially for the first season. If a lot of people come in, they do a good job, there's no reason to not really bring them back. You know what I mean? And I want to clarify, by the way, I'm a big fan of a lot of the EU casters. In my opinion, I think Specie and Villain are the best duo Lorcana casters right now in the entire competitive scene, by a mile. That's my personal opinion.
I feel like there's been portions of time, and somewhat less now, but a lot of my time that I've existed in Lorcana, in the ecosystem, I feel like I've been pretty in tune with what the player base thinks, especially what the more competitive slanted player base thinks. And I have definitely heard strategy and feedback regarding the some of the casting, and this has changed over time. Mm-hmm. But at least in some of the early ones, that was not congruent whatsoever to what people were actually interested in watching. And I have no idea how they came up with that strategy, or what feedback they got, where they took that from, or anything, right? And a lot of that has started to evolve and has to change. But the key takeaway there is that if you think that something can be done better on the casting side or just on the production side, the only way to actually get it to change is to communicate with Ravensburger in a way that is, I don't know, I guess direct and has some sort of like integrity and validity. Twitch chat and a comment on a random YouTube channel, not going to do it. But opening up like a tab in the official Discord for feedback on the production for that gig, or Twitter most of the time, that's how things actually change. Because like, I think that the outside looking in, I definitely believe this before I was on the casting side, you just assume that they like know what they're doing, and like they have like a strategy, and it's like well thought out, and like it's based on data. And it's not. Like, people are kind of just flying by the seat of their whatever. I forget the phrase. And yeah, you just, as a production and as a caster, you just don't get a lot of feedback that you can parse into, like, okay, this is the correct decision to go for from here, right? And I think if people were aware of that, as a viewer, as a listener, they would understand that their opinion and their feedback actually has a lot more weight than they maybe think it does. Because, like, it is extremely impactful when you give positive or negative feedback through a channel that they actually listen to. So I would highly recommend doing that.
For sure, yeah. Our next comment is from Tradus. They say, great deep dive on the hypothetical super lucky 5-0 start. This is something that myself and Moyen mentioned last weekend. They say, definitely seems like playing it with the likely result being a natural split, the high roll being a 2-0, allowing you to split the next 3 and having a great seeding. But if you 0-2, you 3 matches to get another 2-0 to offset it and then split the others. So, just to give you some context, Brendan, we had a question last week. It was a very big question, but they were basically saying, if I get 5-0, like if I go 2-0, 2-0, 2-0, 2-0 in DLC, then should I split the rest of my games? Should I try and play out my 6th round to get my next win and then ID the rest because then my seeding is really, really high? Do I, so there's a lot of kind of questions around that, and we had some very interesting takes regarding it. But I think Moyen did a great job at explaining where he would kind of take the risks per se, because if you decide to play out the round 6 and you lose, it's not like you're absolutely lost. You still have a chance there. You just need to win. You basically just need to win another game and then ID your other 2 and you'll still basically be in. But it's just interesting at what stages you want to do that. And if you want to be completely safe, it is actually better to just, once you get your 5 wins, you just ID the rest. You're guaranteed. You are literally guaranteed to get in, but then you just have to take that lower seed, right?
I think that there is some nuance to the word safe there. So yeah, you might be safe to lock day 2, but you're less safe to actually perform well in the tournament, because you can get such a higher seed by playing a minimal amount more rounds, right? Like, yes, you have this small chance where you maybe don't make it, like this huge outlier where you go 0-2, 0-2, 0-2, but the benefit of having a higher seed can be quite extreme, I believe, in some of these challenges. I do think that the first player, second player advantage, at least in this metagame, has changed a bit. It's not as significant as it used to be back in the day when we were all just like spamming fucking wheel decks into each other. that was a bit worse. So now the metagame is more diverse and you have like these control decks. There's less aggro in general. I do find the first player advantage to not be as significant as it was. It could also just be less at the front of our minds, right? Because beforehand we had Pixelborn data. We had this large data set that was like, yeah, it's pretty bad. So, but it's weird. If I was in that situation, I think strategically, I would play for the higher seed, at least to play to get that one more win and then ID through there. But emotionally, as you go through this kind of tournament and you're deep into the day, you're tired, you're exhausted, and you've sort of achieved that goal where you're like, wow, I could just, I can lock it in right now, and I'm day 2 and I'm good to go and we're done for today, and I don't have this possibility of this devastating loss. I think it's very enticing to make the emotional, to go with the emotional side of just, okay, I ID the way through. And I'm sure someone can make an argument that is strategically correct as well. I would just say, without doing the math, I would think that it would be strategically optimal to try to play minimal amount more rounds to lock that 1 or 2 more wins, and then ID after that.
Yeah.
To get high seed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Next comment is from Josh Halson. They say, if you're splitting at a DLC, you report the game as normal. You just randomize who wins the second game. You don't use the ID button because then it would put you down as having drawn both games rather than both winning one. It's why it's splitting, not an ID. Sounds like nitpicking, but it's important people know so they don't accidentally mess up their reporting. But then again, when it says you randomize who wins the second game, how do you randomize it, right? Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, right?
Because that part's against the rules. So,
I guess you just call a judge and say we are IDing, again, IDing, splitting, whatever.
Yeah,
you want to call it.
we're IDing, so we're gonna roll a die and then you fucking DQ.
Get out of the building. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, that's kind of one of those gray areas where you have this. So the ID button on Melee is effectively a lose-lose, right? It's just strictly suboptimal. So, yeah, and then you, at the same time, the rules don't allow you to randomly determine the winner of the, or how the split exactly goes down. So, yeah. I don't know. It's one of those things where the rules do not sort of encapsulate the actual experience. You know? Because clicking the button would be dumb, and then not clicking the button would be cheating. So, sweet.
Yep. And the final comment is from Ludini7. They say, love your content, guys. Amazing as always. 2 questions today, more hypothetical around DLCs. Where, as in what cities, would you like to see DLCs next year? As an NA gamer in the Northeast, I'd love to see one in the Boston/New York area. Is this quite common that they only usually do it in like Chicago, Atlanta? Because I've never really seen too many TCG events like right on the kind of East Coast.
So that's a really interesting topic, how they choose those. So the way it worked in Flesh and Blood is they effectively partnered with Channel Fireball, and they were kind of like using... So from what I understand, and again, preface everything with I'm an idiot, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but Channel Fireball would basically get these contracts with these venues that could be quite long. So years, they could be multi-year long contracts, and Channel Fireball would have that slot to go into. So because of that, a lot of the Flesh and Blood tournaments end up being at the same place that like the Magic tournaments were. That it was like the same venue, same area, maybe a different time, sometimes the same time, and that leads to a lot of it. I know that it could not be the case now, but like off the back of COVID, Flesh and Blood actually they stopped working with Channel Fireball, and then they started having a really hard time finding event venues. And it was like a huge problem. It was like one of those secret problems. They never told anybody about this, but it was like the worst kept secret. For instance, like San Jose Worlds 2023, could be 2022 as well. We were in like this very nice venue, and somebody bought our spot, and they bumped us out, and they bumped us to a tent.
Oh,
it was a nice
God.
tent. Don't get me wrong. So they bumped the Worlds out to a tent. But this is the first World Championships of Flesh and Blood, so like the creator James is like very upset because they want this nice venue to show off the game, and to like they hired this like film crew, and they were talking about like making like a Netflix thing, like all this bullshit. And that film crew was there, by the way. We never saw any of that footage. But yeah, it ended up being in like what was you would consider to be not a nice venue, and that was because somebody bumped us out of our spot last minute. And then also the World Championships after that, we didn't have a venue announced until 2 months before, something like that.
I think you told us this story actually. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, 2
this.
months max.
Yeah.
So, and everybody was like, oh, these people are so incompetent. And yes, it is down to incompetence, but what it was really down to is that they just could not find a venue. Like straight up in like all of Europe, they could not find a venue that could host like 2,000 players. So they ended up eventually getting one in Barcelona. So, in regards to taking it back to the U.S., why is it always in the same places? I think it probably has to do something with that, with this like availability, and also this like precedence. Like this venue has hosted this kind of thing before. They have the infrastructure we need. We know their internet isn't $50,000 a day. That's a thing, by the way. So they people have run tournaments here, and they know they're not going to get screwed. And when I'll give you a real example of the 50K in a day. So there's a tournament venue in Dallas. Actually, it's in Arlington, so right outside of Dallas. It's near the Ranger Stadium. It's called Esports Arena. The internet there is $50,000 a day, from what I understand. So, like, One Piece did a nationals there, and they have like no coverage. And yeah, usually
I wonder why they have no coverage, right? Yeah.
So usually people do like Halo, like it's like Halo majors there and stuff like that. And it's not even a nice arena. They call it the Esports Arena, but it's just a fucking regular ass convention center. Locations that we would like to see. Let's talk about that. New York for sure, but it's not gonna. So it'll be in New York, but it's not gonna be in like Manhattan, which is fine. It'll probably be in Jersey, but you can take the trip over to Manhattan. That's a great location. For me, I prefer locations with less crime rather than more. And people probably think I'm talking about like, I don't know, like name your stereotypical crime city in America. I'm actually not talking about that. I'm talking about mostly California, to be honest, surprisingly. So, like, for instance, when we went to San Jose for Worlds, like I mentioned, dude, I feel like half the players got robbed and mugged.
Really?
Like,
oh, my God.
Yes. Multiple players in day 2 were like, oh, yeah, this player doesn't have their deck because their car window was broken. And they were, and, like, there was a developer for Flesh and Blood who got mugged, by the way, on the weekend, twice. I think, he's just got the look or something. But yeah, by far, it's downtown San Jose, which is actually where I'm at right now recording this. I'm in San Jose because I have family there. Downtown San Jose was by far the worst. There was like a bunch of cities that Flesh and Blood has gone to. People are like, I'm not going. It's so dangerous. And for the most part, those cities are actually, they didn't live up to the hype. It was every single time I've gone to like a California venue, downtown LA or downtown San Jose, it was terrible. And I live in California, by the way, and I like California. But downtown California, every single time has been, I don't know, it's just been terrible. Like, so many people have gotten mugged and their cars have gotten broken into and things like that. So I would like to see, I prefer venues that are, I actually kind of prefer going to, like, Indianapolis sometimes or going to, actually, I really like Dallas. I know I used to live in Dallas, so that was convenient, but Dallas is great. You got 2 cities there. You've got tons of stuff to do. Super easy to get to. Dallas is by far my favorite city. Also smack dab in the middle of the United States.
Mm-hmm. So,
Seattle's going to be sick.
So if you guys don't see Brendan on the next episode of the podcast, he's been robbed, mugged, and probably left on the streets somewhere.
There's a bit... So San Jose is like, I believe it's technically bigger, geographically bigger than San Francisco, for instance. So it's like a big place. It's not like all of San Jose is dangerous. It's just that the downtown area near the venue we were at was... Yeah, it was just not a nice area, to be honest. And the reason I bring it up too, and like there might be some people like that offends them, but Flesh and Blood just had so many instances of them booking like events in like Baltimore or somewhere else, and people were like absolutely not going, no way, no chance. And it ended up that venue was in like a fine area. The hotel was right next to it, and we all had like a great time. And nobody said shit about San Jose. And then it was like, dude. I was on coverage and I had to explain multiple players like not being able to play day 2 because their decks were like stolen.
That is bizarre. That's actually bizarre to hear that. That's wild.
Yeah, it was like so I like I'm not a huge fan of Vegas. I don't know about you.
I've been to Vegas once and I was not the biggest fan of it, so yeah.
I don't hate it. It's just one of the most common venues for TCG events. And mostly due to like the price of everything. I just don't think it's worth the hype if you're there for like a card gaming event. It's also over 110 degrees in the summer, so.
And on that note, we're gonna move into the Seattle predictions and the tier list we're doing as well. So yeah, if you guys want to have your questions read out on next week's episode of the podcast, be sure to leave a comment down below. We didn't actually get too many comments on last week's episode of the pod, so guys, leave your thoughts on just Seattle in general. Even if you attended, this podcast is probably the best one to leave the comments on. We'll read out all the feedback from there. So to start things off, before we jump into the tier list, Brendan, I'm going to ask you right now, not what do you think the most represented deck is going to be. What deck do you think can win the entire thing?
It's like a super easy answer for me. For me, it's just blue-red. I have seen Amethyst Emerald creeping up.
Yep.
It looks impressive. And this was something that was kind of breaking out in Vegas. So I think that Amethyst Emerald's going to rise up in popularity quite a bit, especially off the back of some recent results. Honestly, multiple Emerald decks. Emerald Steel, of course, will be much, much, much more represented. That being said, I'm happy to stick to my guns where I was immediately after the DLC Vegas, which is that Blue-Red was expected to be the most played deck. Everybody was ready before it. Anybody who brought a deck to Vegas was like, I have a game plan for Blue-Red, because dodging it was, you'd have to just be kind of dumb to think that you were going to dodge it, right? You could get lucky, but your strategy should not have been, I'm just not going to play any Blue-Red. That shouldn't have been the thesis of your deck pick. And nevertheless, despite everybody being prepared for this deck, it performed extremely well. So I think that shows, that speaks to the deck's resilience. And I also think that the deck has a lot of, it has this like ability to be quite dynamic and modular and actually adjust to the metagame as it adapts as well. So the versions of Blue Red that will show up to Seattle, I think, will be a bit different than the versions that show up to Vegas, and we could see this same archetype sort of still be ahead of the metagame and ahead of the curve, because I think the cards in that color combination are just fundamentally very powerful, and pretty much any metagame that could end up showing up to Seattle.
That's fair, yeah. I really kind of had a similar thought pattern for quite some time, and like in general there is this kind of thought that, you know, it seems like in Europe there's a lot of people who love playing blue red, and then ever since Zan won Vegas, it seems like NA, especially all of like the set champs and stuff, have just been absolutely filled with Emerald Steel players. But
bro, give them an excuse to play that fucking. They will play that deck.
Yeah.
I don't know how your set champs are in Europe, but the set champs in NA, honestly, every set champs I've played has just been a green steel fiesta.
Yeah. But the reason why, my answer to what deck do I think is going to take down the tournament is actually, I'm going to go so far as to say I think that Emerald Steel could do it again, and the reason why I say it is because I think that deck has the highest pop-off potential of any deck in the game. It can do some of the most unfair things over any deck. I think the closest deck that it comes to is like maybe how Amber Steel can absolutely pop off at the start if they have the absolute nuts of like Cinderella, removes the 1-drop, straight into Aerial, Whole New World. And then Blue Red can do some nasty stuff as well if they get the absolute Giga Ramp. But fundamentally, if your opponent starts the game with like, you know, the Shift Diablo, they play another Diablo, or they pair it alongside the Prince John, if they get that opener as consistently as possible throughout the entire tournament and also have a decent run, it's exactly what happened to Zan. Like, Zan also said that his opening hands every time were absolutely insane. And that's also, you know, Lorcana players knowing how to abuse the mulligan in this game, mulligan effectively. Oftentimes you're mulligan 5, 6, 7 cards within the Emerald Steel deck, but for that is the reason why I do think that this deck could take down the entire tournament again, because you could just have one player that runs absolutely insanely hot with it. And I think it's when that deck runs hot, it runs hotter than nearly anything else in the meta, in my opinion.
I think the mid of that deck, or like the not running hot, just like the average, is also pretty fucking good. So
okay,
that's I think that really speaks to that deck's power. I think the deck, honestly, I don't think you could make a reasonable debate of two people trying to like die on the hill of like blue red is the best deck or green steel is the best deck. Like, I think they both have really good arguments, and they're both extremely powerful decks. It's just what deck is going to be the right one for the metagame on the day. So, yeah, and I do think that green steel, and this is less so for Amber Steel. Amber Steel, the high rolls are way different than the mid rolls, but green steel's mid roll, I feel like, is still just a fine, serviceable, strong deck. There do happen to be some high rolls where you just lock your opponent out of the game and they can do absolutely nothing, and you just like you just win, right? You might still be playing at turn 3, but the game is over and you are just going through the motions. And green steel's always had that. It's always had that high roll potential, but I feel like at the same time, for most of its existence, it's also had this sort of strong backbone where even its kind of mid-roll games, it's still just a very, very good deck.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure.
What about your one love?
My one love, my Amber Emerald deck.
Yeah,
I've talked about this on a few other channels. Yeah, I've talked about it on a few other channels a little bit, and a lot of people kept asking me what's my feedback, what's like, what do I think of this matchup? I'll be honest, it's nearly unwinnable in my opinion, because if you compare these decks together, I mean, it's also similar to the mirror match where you can get locked in this situation where, like, let's say I'm the Amber Emerald player, I have a Prince John on board, my opponent has an Exerted Diablo, I'll do You Forgot Me to discard 2 of their cards, and then they'll just draw the cards, because I've drawn off my Prince John, they'll trigger their Diablo, they'll draw their cards, and I might as well, like, sure, I've gotten rid of some of their cards, but they've basically just gained them straight back. And the main difference between those decks is, like you said, Brendan, even the kind of the mid of that deck still has the potential to do like the Ursula paired alongside these damage removal songs, and Amber Emerald just doesn't have that. So you have both game plans where you can consistently, you know, discard your opponent's hand for the most part, but then you can also be able to deal with their board quite effectively as well. So for that reason. And then also, it's like if you guess any Emerald deck, they're able to snipe the Under the Sea out of your hand quite easily. So I still think Amber Emerald is a powerful deck, but you really, really, really want to be dodging Emerald Steel as much as possible. I think it's the worst matchup in my opinion. It's not to say that I think Amber Emerald can still do quite well, but it is solidly a tier 2 deck in my opinion right now, and I probably always has been a tier 2 deck in my opinion.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as someone who's never played the deck, I agree with you.
Yeah.
What about the best deck that nobody talks about? Ruby Amethyst. Dude,
Ruby
bro, Amethyst is like the...
have you heard the new spice, Brendan? What people are playing now? I think it's safe enough to say this. I think it's safe enough to say this. I don't know if I don't want to like say this in case someone who's thought of this first is gonna get really mad about us saying this on the podcast, but I think it's safe enough to put it out. So I quote tweeted somebody on Twitter. So there's this card that's going around the Ruby Amethyst decks, Brendan, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. They think it's the card to really be able to outvalue the green steel player, and it is Finders Keepers. It's the 5-cost inkable action that draws 3 cards. It's not a song, it's simply an action. 5 cost, draw 3 cards. What do you think about that?
Bro, as soon as you started that sentence, I knew it was going to be some card I've never heard of in my life. So
yeah.
I'm pulling it up here.
Yep.
Let's see. I do want to say I am looking at the top 2 lists from the recent tournament, the 700 player tournament that you casted.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no spice here. There is deck building decisions. They are teched for different metagames, in my opinion. And the one that got the higher seed is more interesting than the one that was right below it, because that one has 8 1/3s in it. So definitely came ready for a steel metagame.
Mm-hmm.
It also has, notably no library, 2 Merlins for what should be the mirror, 1 Lady Tremaine's got 3/1 split, and 2 B Kings undisputed. So like, I know we talk about a 3/1 split on the Lady Tremaine Madame Medusa, which is usually indicative of you kind of being like, okay, Sapphire, I'll be less powerful against it because my aggro game plan is so powerful that, once we get to the late game, I don't have to worry about it as much. But with the B King, gives you the extra reach against Tamatoa, and I guess B King also helps with some of these ward characters that are showing.
B King helps against John a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Finders Keepers, 5 cost, inkable, amethyst, action, draw 3 cards. Why is this why? What about this is really good against green steel?
So I think the idea is that you just simply outdraw them. Do you remember how Ruby Amethyst played against the Bucky decks back in the day? Was like they would just draw through the Diablo, just keep drawing as much as possible. I think that's the potential plan, is if they just need to
draw through the Diablo.
Yeah, they need to potentially outvalue them. Again, I might be wrong on this, but there's a reason. I'm not just saying, I think some players are putting this in. Like, I've seen some top players talk about this card and this inclusion, so I'm not the Ruby Amethyst connoisseur by any means, but there must be a reason players are playing this, right?
I'm not making a judgment on it. I'm curious, but I did find that so I favored that strategy, this like turbo draw strategy, a bit more when the green steel lists were not playing Prince John.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was like another strategy against the Prince John versions where you would actually get quite low in cards in hand, and you would make you would turn off a lot of their cards. You would turn off their engine, and you would turn off their cards.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, when you're on the draw, you can get like locked at like 5 ink, and that's just ass, and you're kind of stuck. But yeah, that's interesting that they've gone sort of parabolic to the other side, where now they're trying to outdraw the Prince John.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, it feels almost impossible for me to comment on the efficacy of this card without having played it, especially into the context of the current iterations of Green Steel. But it would not have been the card that if I was going through the card gallery, I'd be like, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
This is it.
It's probably also, noteworthy that, like...
It has to be so ass in other matchups, too.
I don't know. Like,
five inkable, draw 3, you always have to pay 5. It's not a song. So... Bro, think about this card's contemporary, though. It's Friends on the Other Side, which is 3, inkable.
Bro, think about Friends on the Other Side in context against Green Steel. You never play that card because you always have to ink it, because Ursula Deceiver is a card, so they'll always snipe it out of your hand. At least they can't snipe this out of your hand, right?
Okay, so yeah, so that's very important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy you said that, because I didn't think about that. So this card can't be snagged by Ursula, so it's like a more reliable card to keep in hand in order to facilitate draw in the later game. Also, I think you're pretty much guaranteed, it seems like, to get to 5 ink. 6 and 7 can be a bit harder once their engine turns on. So, yeah, I guess so. I didn't really think about the Ursula use case where it dodges Ursula.
Like bro, like I feel like you're never playing friends. And I saw it in the tournament over the weekend where players were like trying to be greedy to say like, oh, I'll keep that, like I really value this friends, and they just always got sniped by Ursula every time they kept it, right?
Yeah. I was just thinking in terms of like card power, like it's contemporary being a 3-cost inkable that you basically never pay for. That draws you 1 less card, and it's like you're paying 2 more ink, and you're effectively paying like 5 more ink. It feels like, because the other one most of the time costs 0 to draw 1 additional card. So, yeah, it's a tough sell, but I can't knock it until I try it.
I'd be curious. I hope you get to cast some with this, because then you'll be able to make the decision. You'll be able to see, is it really bad or is it actually valid, right?
Yeah. And what happens if all those people just get bonked in day 1?
Yeah, I mean, you can come on the podcast and tell everyone, I told you so. Yeah.
What do you think about my statement that Ruby Amethyst is like the best deck that nobody talks about? Maybe I've been out of the loop, but it does seem like Ruby Amethyst is a deck that, okay, it's not where it was previously, because I used to talk it up. I used to be like, this is the best deck. You know, even when Blue Red was on a rampage. But I do feel like right now Ruby Amethyst is a bit of a sleeper, even though it's going to show up in Force. I do think it's still going to be quite popular, but it doesn't have that thing, you know? It's not on the tip of everybody's tongue. Like, nobody's excited about Ruby Amethyst, yet it's just this beater that's going to show up to the tournament and do well.
I think it's still a good choice, to be honest. Like, people want to bring this deck against Red Blue still in general. Like, you still have a favorable matchup into Red Blue if you're playing Ruby Amethyst, in my opinion. Especially if you go for the whole Flynn Sisu line. That's another interesting thing in this deck, actually, Brennan. And the Finders Keepers is... It's weird because, yeah, if you add this card into your deck, you are making your blue-red matchup worse, in my opinion. You want to really be going for your more aggressive line against the blue-red players, but the Finders Keepers, you're trying to basically outvalue the green-steel player until they run out of fuel, kind of like full commit to a board, and then maybe you can do a B prep or something like that. But I think Ruby Amethyst is still a very, very strong bring to this tournament. I think there are definitely different tech options you can include for different matchups. But I think it's suffering because I feel like most people probably consider this to be the deck that's like, oh, it's like the most consistent deck if you want to make day 2, but not to win the tournament. How do you feel about that statement?
I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it. But I do think with the rise of Emerald Steel, I would assume that the popularity and the efficacy of Ruby Amethyst is going to wane as a result. Yeah. And even Emerald Amethyst, like that deck, when you playing Ruby Amethyst in that deck, it just feels like they're on a better version of your deck sometimes. Like, especially with the Tiberius and shit, it's just, oh my god, it's a bad matchup. It's a really bad matchup. I mean, maybe they've cut some of the more aggressive 1-drops that they used to have. So
that's the thing, though. It's hard. Even the Emerald Amethyst deck, it's like there's still different ways you can build it. You can build a slower version of it that helps you out in some matchups. But I still think if you're playing that color combination, you need your Merfolks and your Banzais, in my opinion. Even if you face some Amber Steels or some Green Steels, like, it's tough because they'll be able to snipe them easily. But it makes your other matchups where you're not facing, it makes them so much better. You're so much more likely to win it. And if you kind of slow down even a little bit, it can be tough to come back. But my thought process around that deck was, I thought that was seeing maybe a little bit of a downcline. Like, after Vegas, I was like, okay, I think Green Steel will be on the rise and maybe Emerald Amethyst will be like slowing down a little bit. But in this event over the weekend, it was like, for conversion rates into top 64, it was like one of the highest, I think. I'll have to pull up the data again, but it seemed to perform really well if you wanted to make a day 2 at least. So I think it is still a good deck. I think ultimately we're going to see the top 5 be not in this order, but it's probably still going to be like Red Blue, Amber Steel, Green Steel, Ruby Amethyst, Emerald Amethyst, something like that, I think, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, but that's also, that top 5 is not controversial at all. Because the drop off between the number 6 is quite big.
Yeah, usually. I think the number 6 could equal...
The number 6 is like blue steel or like some
No,
other
it's like
emerald
hyper
deck, or
aggro
like,
usually and then blue steel, right?
Yeah,
But I think we could see blue steel come up a little bit because blue steel is the one deck that I feel at least has a very, very good matchup into emerald steel. Like it should do quite well against that deck, right?
How do you feel about amber steel right now? Because that was a deck... that was a very, very highly represented deck. I'm not sure. I can't remember if it was in Birmingham as well, but in Vegas.
It was second, yeah, in Birmingham.
Yeah. And it did terrible. So bad. At least in Vegas. It did very, very bad for day 2 conversion. What are your thoughts on this deck? Because this was a deck that people were, in the lead up to the previous Lorcana challenges, they were hard truthing. Like, this kind of felt like one of the decks. People like the matchup into blue-red. Not that bad. I got the tech, I'm ready to go. And was not true. Was not true. They had one of the worst conversion rates, and it was one of the most popular decks. Where do you think it lands now? Because it also, talk about a recent big tournament, the most recent big tournament, it won it. It won the whole thing.
Yeah, which event did it win? It was it won the one I casted, my god. The 606 player event one. Yeah. I don't know, like...
Don't you know?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, man. Like, it's a bit of a weird one. I think a lot of people will still play it. A lot of people know how to play the deck. The different inclusions you want to have in it now. I think you really still want to stick with this quite aggressive line rather than going all in on like your full kind of shift package. I still think a lot of the decks include like the shift Cinderella. I think most of them have kind of cut the shift Queen package and even the shift Robin Hood package. Some still have the shift Robin Hood. But a lot of them are opting for the daisies. I'm a big fan of the piglets. But the interesting thing to me is, like, previously all of the Amber Steel decks had cut Grab Your Swords because it makes their matchups into the... a lot of the decks that weren't Green Steel at the time kind of worse, or maybe it wasn't that necessary. But now equally it's like, okay, does Grab Your Swords make its way back into the deck to try and deal with all of this, Diablo, Prince John stuff, but then it can also just easily be sniped out of the hand by a 2-cost Ursula Deceiver. So the game plan against Green Steel is like, I feel like maybe people... I haven't personally tested that matchup enough, but maybe people feel like Amber Steel versus Green Steel is like a fine matchup, but like all of the Emerald cards, well, not all the Emerald cards, like that 2-cost Ursula is so detrimental to the Amber Steel player. And even like there's times when, sure, if they do a whole new world, they get a bit of advantage, it's okay. If you wheel your opponent into a couple of those 2-drop Ursulas, they literally just like start like removing your most important removal tools. So, like, I don't know, like, I think a lot of people are still kind of high on the deck, but I think it probably still has to be this more aggressive build rather than the slower shift version of the deck. I don't know. What's the type of builds you got to see?
I did bait you, by the way. Amber Steel did not win the tournament that you cast. It won a different tournament. It was like a 70 player.
I think
top 16.
I think it did win the first one I did though. I'm gonna double check this, but maybe I was wrong.
Wait, Jerome. No, that's just a coincidence. Those names are close.
But yeah, what are your thoughts on the deck, Brennan?
Just repeat. I was checking my data there for a second. So repeat the final part of the question real quick.
Well, I was just saying that I think it needs to be built more aggressively rather than going for the slower shift lines in terms of the shift Robin Hood, the shift Queen, which obviously help out more if you want to do the broken whole new world stuff, but like, I feel like the Emerald player has access to so much more discard stuff that... Yeah.
I don't know. The question of what is and what is not the aggro version of this. Obviously, there's the hyper aggro versions, but I think that the inclusion... I don't know, at least it wasn't before, but is the inclusion of things like 3 piglets, is that standard? Because for me, when I see that, I'm like, okay, they're willing to go more aggressive because piglet is just such a terrible card into other steel decks. And steel is a reasonable... has a reasonable share of the metagame. That being said, like, Piglet is super strong into not steel decks.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing Piglets
those
a lot.
A bit more aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing
because I think that those lists have been performing well. Yeah.
For sure. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, just to confirm, the event I casted like about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that was an Amber Steel deck that won. And interestingly, it did still have Shift Robin Hood. The Naveen's have been like super, super useful, I think, in that deck, to be honest. But also, the one card I've seen in nearly every Amber Steel list now, though, is the Lawrence. I think the Lawrence is a great inclusion. In that list. It's quite good against the Ruby Sapphire decks because it's not easily interactable. they have to damage it somehow before they can easily remove it. It's just a well-statted card. Like, I'm a big fan of Lawrence in the Amber Steel decks. Also combos naturally with Rapunzel and stuff like that if it gets damaged.
Okay, my last question. Blue Steel, wheel or no wheel?
Wheel. Always wheel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You disagree?
I have no...
You've no input.
Honestly,
okay.
I don't feel strongly one way or another. It's not a deck that I would bring to this kind of tournament. Like, maybe if I was...
If you thought the entire room was going to be literally all green steel, maybe. Like, if you thought it was like 90% green steel, would you consider blue steel? Or would you still...
I would consider it. But in terms of the decks that I have in my back pocket to bring to a tournament like this, I would just be looking at Ruby Amethyst or Blue Red. And
as has been the case for the past 3 sets, yeah.
Exactly, It's been like that for a while. Like, someone would have to make a very compelling argument for me to play something else. Which is possible. It's possible, but I do think those decks are decently well positioned into somewhat different metagames at this point.
Sure.
I would most likely opt to play Blue-Red at this tournament, unless somebody had a very compelling argument for something else.
Okay, before we move into actually just filling out the tier list, I do have one quick question for you, Brendan, and it's actually just kind of related to the comment I had there. I'm not even going to ask the question of do you think the set 5 meta has been a healthy metagame, because I think a deck that has the 5 top ink color combinations can all perform quite well in general. I think that is quite healthy, but I'll kind of ask, do you enjoy the fact that we've had these a lot of these similar ink color combinations throughout maybe the past 3-4 sets, and all very much the same decks, not even really different types of decks? Are you hoping that set 6 will bring a very different type of deck? It can still be a Ruby Amethyst deck, or it can still be like a Amber Steel deck, but do you think fundamentally the types of decks that they are always going to remain the same? Or like, are you excited when something changes a lot, or do you like when it's very much the same deck with only slight card changes?
I think it's a very interesting question of game design. So I think the reason a lot of these ink combinations tend to perform well and they tend to not really change is because the color combinations, they just complement each other well. Like, you have to be doing, your deck wants to be doing like sort of a checklist of a few things to be competitive in Lorcana, and then some of these combinations don't have that, right? So if you looked at something like Ruby Steel, okay, you have the 2 best removal colors, but you have like
which
no
is
card
interesting.
draw.
Yeah, because you think about that. Like, there was literally a comment in our Discord. I wrote a long message this morning responding to it, and they were like, I really like these color combinations. Ideally, they have, you think about Ruby, you think about Steel, they're like great removal options. And they're like, I just don't know why I can't make it work. And I wrote out this big, long paragraph, and I was like, it was the same thing. It was because the card draw, I'm like, whatever card draw does exist within that color combination right now, all exists by having a board-based presence, and you will draw cards depending on how often your characters challenge other characters. So that relies on so many additional factors. You have certain items in play that when your character challenges, you draw a card. Sometimes you want to pair song cards or action cards that allow you to attack ready characters to also draw cards. So it just feels like there's way too many hoops. And at that stage, you're taking, the damage, the damage removal, and then the non-damage removal, the Ruby and the Steel. But you're not even really utilizing that in the control elements. It's more of a board-based mid-range deck than a control deck, right? So that's the ultimate problem with it.
Yeah, so you can have a deck that doesn't have card draw or doesn't have removal. It just needs to be doing something very extreme on the end of like likely aggro, but maybe like if we look at Blurple has the issue of bad removal, but it has great card draw. It has great sort of questing threats. It has board presence through the Madame Mim package. It has these super crazy top end threats like Elsa, but ultimately it just doesn't have. It doesn't have like a nuclear button that it hits where it's like grab your swords or be prepared. Like it just doesn't do well against more go wide strategies, and doesn't have a way to really crawl back from being behind. But it can get so far ahead in terms of ink and card draw that it can win by just developing a board that's big enough on its own. But there's like so many color combinations in Lorcana that are, because of the way the color pie is designed, they just don't complement each other well in the current metagame, in the sense of like the metagame asks you asks your ink combination a very specific set of questions, and if you can't answer them, it's basically unplayable. And this is why in set 1 every ink combination was playable for the most part. Like pretty much every single ink combination was playable and relatively competitive, but that's because they were all doing the same mid-range shit. There was like some outliers, right? Whole New World was an outlier, Be Prepared was an outlier, and you saw those exist in a lot. Like there was a lot of Ruby based decks and there was a lot of Steel based decks because those cards were massive outliers. But for the most part, most decks were just mid-range sort of value decks, and most ink combinations can do that. Mm-hmm. What they can't do is have, Be Prepared, Grab Your Swords, or Falavasham plus frickin' Popsicle, draw a million cards, or like this non-interactable
Prince
Diablo,
John.
Prince John, like, or Double Sing Ursula, like that stuff just doesn't exist. And Prince John, Diablo, and Ursula, those cards, while they're good, they are backed up by Steel having the best songs and also being removal. So they're providing removal to Emerald, but they're also providing card draw in the form of Diablo and Prince John, and Ursula. So you're double saying with Storm and John, you're drawing more cards. So like these combinations, they complement each other in a way that is required to compete in the metagame. So the question of like, do I want to see that change? Do I get excited when that change? Yes and no. Okay. I don't really care if it changes. I don't mind it. It doesn't bother me. Like I don't really get excited where it's like, oh, I really want to play a Steel Ruby deck for some reason that exists outside of like the card design. Because like some people, like they just want to play like that rogue color or the rogue color combination. They think that's cool. For me, I'm more focused on like what do the cards do and what kind of play style do they evoke. But I do think that for some of these color combinations to be more competitive, they would have to maybe sacrifice, making the design a bit homogenous and break some of the rules that exist in the color pie. Because if you just gave every single color combination removal, like great removal like Be Prepared, or card draw like Friends on the Other Side, or Flaversham Popsicle combo, then it would be like drafting Lorcana, where you just fucking play the whatever is the best, Like the color pie serves a great role, but it does lead to, because there are these distinct rules of design in each color, like there are limitations when you try to combine two that don't necessarily meet the criteria that is demanded for the competitive metagame of Lorcana. So I'm not trying to rush into it, because I would worry that it might dilute what makes the game special, which is, I think a lot of that is up to the color pie, or the ink pie, however you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because we've seen a lot of cards in set 6 already that there's a simple thing that we've nearly seen one of these types of cards in every color, where it says, when a card enters your inkwell, do X, or X happens, right? And that's like, okay, that's just support for Sapphire with numerous different types of colors. So like, maybe helping Blurple, maybe helping Amber, Sapphire, these color combinations that haven't really performed too well. But I do ultimately think, fundamentally, these ink colors, they're good at doing a specific thing. But like at the same time, and we'll get into it once you kind of do the tier list here, there are exceptions to it, and I think I've really seen this weekend has really opened my eyes that players can build decks in certain ways that they can at least do their best to try and compete with the metagame. They still have to have the answers in the deck to say, okay, can I beat a Diablo opener? Can I beat this really powerful opener? Because if you don't even have the potential to answer that, you're just straight up going to lose. So there are some interesting deck building decisions. Okay, can I make this ink color combination work, but still be able to answer that? Or do I just ignore it and, like you say, go over it in some fashion?
I haven't thought about it too much, so I wouldn't want to, defend this opinion with my life. But I would like, one thing I do want to see eventually is hybrid cards. So, like a Ruby Amethyst card, or a Ruby Sapphire card, or maybe a Ruby Steel card. And I think because you're not giving a single ink color, like you're not breaking the color pie on like a Steel card, and now it just like makes Steel way better in all the Steel decks that already exist. It doesn't necessarily fix the problem in Ruby Steel per se. It just makes green Steel better, or any other Steel complement color better that's actually competitive. like maybe you could break some of the color pie rules on hybrid cards because they would be very specific to shoring up some of the weaknesses that exist, combining two ink combinations that, you know, are just, they're the best removal combinations, but they have effectively no card draw, and like late game, sort of like mid game attrition and like value game.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, they're also based in combat, where like a lot of current Lorcana is like, yes, combat happens, but you know, when we go through like we do our set reviews, like even when we had the Mufasa, like Mufasa looks like a fucking insane card, but why does it kind of suck? Because it hits the field and it does nothing, and like you cannot do that in the modern stage of the metagame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd also be interested to see colorless cards as well. And I don't know if you've heard about the stuff on Twitter so far, though, Brendan, because there was a Amethyst card. I think it might have been a location or whatever. And people are obviously so in tune with the game that they're like, oh, that doesn't, like, that card number doesn't match up to what it should be if it's like the last Amethyst card. So people were like, oh, is there going to be an uneven amount of things or whatever? So all we've been told so far is that there's going to be an equal amount of cards in every color. So people are theorizing that we could even see these hybrid cards this set, or we could see some colorless cards this set. I don't know what it's going to be. I personally think it's maybe a bit too early for that to happen, but I am curious to see what the reason for that is.
I'm less excited about colorless cards because of that like homogeneity they can add, and you know, if it's too good, it literally is just in every single deck. I think that creativity in TCGs and in deck building is actually created through limitation, not through freedom. And I think the perfect example of that, if you want to like sort of take that concept and apply it and feel it immediately, is go draft something like Magic and then go draft Lorcana. Very different experience. Drafting Lorcana is all about just evaluating like the base value of what is the good card in the pack. There's no identity. Like you don't really, because you can make every decision, you make no decisions effectively. If you know how to evaluate cards correctly, you should be making almost zero decisions in the draft, because there almost is always an objectively correct card. The decks have virtually no synergy and no limitation, that at any given point as well, like the context of what you have picked rarely affects what you will pick in the future, outside of like maybe trying to build like a better curve in pack 2 and pack 3. That's why I think the draft experience sucks.
Yeah, I also think, and I could be wrong on this, I think they might have done that on purpose for these sealed and draft formats, because I think that they're,
know why they did it.
I think they're just, and it's not a bad thing, like it's what the game is more so aimed at. I think they're just maybe catering those types of formats to more of a casual audience, that people can just play whatever cards they want, jam it together, and enjoy it.
Sure, but it's not casual. That's the problem. Is it actually just tests your ability to be like a super nerd? There's like you might think it's more like it's more casual to be able to pick any card and not make any mistakes, rather than like, oh, I'm doing Magic, I drafted a bunch of red cards, black cards, and green cards, and now I don't have enough cards to make a minimum deck size thing. Like, yes, that's like the ultra noob mistake, but anybody who has like 5 minutes to study how the game works, or understand, like someone explains them draft, or just like any concept of like, okay, the rule is to make the minimum deck size, maybe I shouldn't be picking like 5 different colors, but in Magic you could just throw them in a deck anyway. The issue is that like this draft format is actually the opposite of casual. It just tests your ability to evaluate card power and value, agnostic of anything else, no limitations. So just like whoever is like the best card evaluator, like on card game fundamentals, will just outdraft pretty much everybody else. I genuinely think that it's like a way less casual format, and I think you can feel that. Like, if you go play a side event draft as a competitive Lorcana player, it's a joke. Like, it is not particularly close at all.
But equally, while after you explain that to me, I do kind of see the logic to that. I can kind of recognize why that's true. For me personally, I still don't enjoy drafting Lorcana, and it's probably again because of those reasons, like you mentioned, like, okay, because I understand card game fundamentals. When I go to do a draft, I should be able to pick the correct card every single time, realistically.
Yeah.
But like, I've drafted in other card games, and what I enjoy about that drafting experience is what you're describing in Magic, which is like, I have decisions because I can't just pick any card. There are limitations. You know what I mean? Like that's what makes it interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
My opponent's in a lane. Like if you have 8 sentient Lorcana drafters, they all are drafting the same deck. Everybody is drafting good card soup. There is no other archetype. It is good card soup. There's no archetypes. It's literally just good card soup, good card soup. So the experience, even though it's a non-casual experience, it gets worse when you have a bunch of good players because everybody is drafting the exact same deck, it's just not fun. Okay, so you said that you thought they did it to like cater to casual audience. I said that I don't literally know why they did it, but I think that the reason it happens is they built Lorcana to be a constructed game, and the pack collation is more attuned to like collecting.
Okay, that makes that's interesting.
And because limited is like a core way of selling packs, they did like the Billy Mays like water coming out of the thing. They like slapped it on. They're like sealed, draft, pack rush. Like anybody who's played any other TCG knows that the limited format of Lorcana, it's not a real limited format. It's like old like the kind of the origin of like Magic. But not even, because Magic had like a color pile limitation. But basically, you're taking a product that's not designed to be played limited, and you're playing it limited. And instead of how Magic spawned that format, because it was a good format and people liked it. You know, maybe it wasn't balanced, but people enjoyed it, and then it grew and it developed. In Lorcana, you're like slapping limited onto what is not a limited product, and it's not fun, in my opinion. I'm sure some people have fun with it, but actually, I'm not going to talk about the conversation, but I talked to the devs and I asked them about, have you thought about changing pack collation and designing for limited and actually like building out a limited format? Like that was a conversation we had. I'm not going to say anything else about the conversation, but like the game is not designed to be played in sealed and draft. Less. Have you
done a Lorcana cube yet, Brendan?
I've not, but
That is very fun. Very fun. It's one of the most fun.
I assume that there's
I've
limitations on
yes.
colors, right?
We basically just do it on like we I think what we did when we did it in Birmingham was we shuffled like the 4 competitive decks together, and we did maybe we didn't do color limitations, but you could do like 3 color limitations. But the fun thing was there was like this pool of like, I know there was like two really strong amber decks together, and nobody else picked up on it except me. That was like, okay, there's like 8 aerials in this pool. I'm just gonna make the ultra giga song deck, and it was absolutely insane. That was still more interesting because fundamentally all of these cards, if you start to break rules and like play a Diablo in a Blurple deck, or play these cards or not a Blurp, like again, let's just say Ruby Steel, right? Even though those weren't the kind of cards that we had in there, but if you kind of allow these colors to have access to these cards, it suddenly becomes really interesting, right? And really fun.
Yeah. I was theorizing, this is pretty much all I did in in Vegas, by the way, because I had so much downtime on the casting side, I was just hanging out with Hal, and we were theorizing on like how to create a Lorcana cube, because there has to be color limitations, but it's also like we were thinking like, okay, is it maybe 3 colors, and then if you add any color outside of your 3 declared colors, do you
pay extra?
Like maybe you have to pay like 2, 2 extra, or something like that, or your 2 color and it has the 2 extra, something like that. I think that someone can create that format and it will be good. But in order for that to permeate to a limited experience in Lorcana, fundamentally they would have to change the pack collation, which I don't
know if they're gonna do, because I actually kind of, the more you think about it, it really does cater to collectors the way it's laid out.
It's like a big pain in the ass to do. It's not a small ask. The upside is they would sell more packs, because right now, anybody who's buying,
maybe they're selling,
in my opinion.
Go on.
Yeah. Oh, just anybody in my opinion who's buying packs of Lorcana to play draft and to play limited. Like I feel like Ravensburger's like kind of getting away with it, Like I think that initial interest and spark is going to dry up pretty quick because the gameplay experience is not there.
Again, apologies everyone. I know we talked a lot about that, but I think this is going to be a bit of a long one. It was definitely an interesting conversation to have. But
bro, they have no idea. We didn't even talk about the fucking Bazaar yet.
New Bazaar podcast coming soon. Kawa and Brendan, trust.
Okay, we'll give the 5-minute TLDR on it. Basically, there's a hero building game. So if you've heard of like not deck building. But if you heard of like backpack battles and something pets. Fighter,
Super Auto Pets that stole the Bazaar's idea, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like that, but instead of like building like the backpack, you're building your hero, and it's like an engine building game, and there's like a lot of different stages you go through that are PvE based, and then you face like a PvE battle, every 5 rounds or something like that. And then it's asynchronous, so when you face a PvP battle, you face a snapshot of someone's deck when they were on that day. And then that only ever happens once. So once you face that, it's out of the pool. But it's completely asynchronous, so no timers, nothing like that. And it's fundamentally, it's like this hero builder. So you have these different heroes. It's not a great sell for the game, but basically the TLDR is that the game has been in development for like 6 years. The owner of Tempo, Reynad, said he was going to come out with it like 6 years
Many years ago, yeah.
And it's finally coming out. And there's a great video by Kriparian where he breaks down the Bazaar's most recent video, which has some gameplay in it, and he played the Friends and Family closed beta, and he talks about like how the game actually works. And the Bazaar went through like so many iterations of where they just completely changed the game, and I would tell you multiple of them turned me off to the game. I was like, okay, this is cooked. This is a terrible idea. The final version looks incredible. It looks so good, and it comes out on the 30th for closed beta. If you have a founder's pack, we're all extremely excited, and yeah. It's just like it would be an injustice to not say PSA. The Bazaar's coming out on the 30th.
PSA.
Moyan's taking my friends and family code.
Yeah,
for free.
Hell yeah. Okay, so we're gonna jump through this tier list really, really quickly for Seattle. It's gonna be a speed run. Brendan, what are you putting number 1? Actually, you want to do it? We'll go order here, right? We're gonna start off with Amber, Amethyst, Hyper Aggro. Where are we putting this?
I thought this was gonna be a Bazaar hero tier list, but here we are.
Here we are.
I'm gonna put that in. So we have S, A, B, C tier. I'd put that in B tier. It's probably like the only B tier deck that actually exists, because it's the only non-meta deck. The deck that like kind of objectively sucks, but can get the right tournament run and like spikes into day 2 every time.
Yep, I agree. Next one is Amber Emerald, my deck. I think I'm gonna put it in basically A tier 2, but it's gonna be on the lower side. I think there's a few other decks we could fit in here, but I think ultimately it's still a tier 2 deck because it can pop off potentially. But yeah, would you agree with that?
Yeah, seems playable. I guess if you're crazy.
I guess, yeah, if you're Kawa. Amber Ruby. This is an interesting one. I haven't heard anything about like the Mufasa decks.
That's an F tier deck. Oh wait, Amber Ruby. Sorry, I was thinking Steel. Probably still F tier. I mean, what does F mean? Like 0% day 2 or 1 makes day 2?
I think I'd put it C. I think I'd put it C tier. No,
you gotta be a man of conviction.
Okay,
that's an F tier deck. Somebody might do okay with it, but it's still an F tier deck.
all right, okay. Amber Sapphire. I hate to do this, but this actually pains me to do this because, like I said, there was one that made top 64, actually top 32 in the 707 player event. But
yeah, there was in Vegas. There was a Steel Ruby deck that made it pretty far.
Yeah.
And it was like a Night Tribe. Like it's still, the deck is still not good, but it can do well, especially if it gets the right pairings.
Amber Steel. Gonna go up here, right? It's still a tier 1 deck. Like I'm gonna consider, like, for me the top 5 decks are probably going in S tier. I'm not gonna lie, but the ordering is gonna be interesting. Are you actually considering putting this as a tier 2 deck?
No.
It's
not
still
in the
gonna
context
be
of Green Steel being maybe the like much more played than it was in the previous tournaments. Like if you were going into Vegas, I would have put it at top B tier or A tier. Sorry.
Sure. Next we've got Emerald, Amethyst. I'm gonna still put this at S tier, but the ordering of this is gonna be interesting for me. Brendan's all-time favorite deck ever. Gonna be Ruby Amethyst, but I'm gonna move it closer to the top. Yeah, for sure. Blurple. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna put Blurple in B tier.
Sure.
I'll put it behind.
It had one good performance.
Yeah.
Like if we were being objective, it's probably at the top of F tier. Oh, does it mean that you can't like spike a tournament with it if you get the right pairings and you're like the insane Blurple player? Yes, but like the average Purple player that's an F tier deck. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Amethyst
You're just trying to be
Steel.
nice because somebody did well with it.
Well,
Amethyst Steel sucks.
You think it sucks, really?
Yeah, there's like no reason to play it anymore. I thought you played it because it had like a more aggressive line. It had like some better early stage removal, but after Ruby got the support it did in the recent sets, like why would you ever play this deck?
Okay, F tier deck. You heard it.
But why would you play this deck over Ruby Amethyst now? Right?
Ugh.
Like it had some compelling arguments at one point, but it lost all of those as Ruby just got like.
I feel like this is also a color combination that can take down green steel though.
Maybe. I mean, I couldn't really speak to that. I think fundamentally as like some of the new cards came in the past 2 sets, the argument to play Steel Amethyst over Ruby Amethyst was. I just don't see it anymore.
Sure. I'd actually be inclined to put it like here probably, but if we're putting it here anyways, it's not going to make a difference whatever order it goes in, right?
Blurple in B tier is a crime.
Okay. I'm going to put this deck, the Speci Special as I like to call it, Ruby Emerald in F tier, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm also going to put the green or the blue cow deck in F tier as well. Green Steel. Yeah. Okay, ordering of this is going to be important. I'm going to put this.
It's in the front right now, like it just is.
I
think. Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
It also shits on Ruby Amethyst, right? So, like, I don't know.
So it's got to be in the front of Ruby Amethyst, right?
Nah, I just think it is right now. I just think it is above that. It might not be at Ruby Amethyst. Might be more represented. I think Green Steel is going to surprise us in terms of how much shows up to Seattle. It's going to be a popular deck.
I'm putting this as the most represented deck, best deck in the game right now, in my opinion.
I think it's the best deck, but you could swap Green Steel out with that. You could swap.
No,
honestly, you can make an argument to swap.
I would be very confident that we don't see this. I think we're gonna see Ruby Sapphire above Green Steel. Maybe I'm wrong, but I want to say I'm very confident that there's gonna be more Ruby Sapphire.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then finally I'd put.
It's just the top of A tier.
Yeah,
sure.
it's top of A tier. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think that this list has some heavy combo bias. So we see Amber Emerald make it into B tier, which maybe is true, or into A tier, and then we have Blurple off the back of one performance in its history of existence is now a B
I'm trying to
deck.
represent the one guy that did well with it. Yeah. But I don't know. Like I feel okay. You know what? I'll do this to make you happy, Brendan. Okay, I'll put it in C. Does that make you feel better? No.
I would say top F tier for sure. One person, one result. I guess it has a good
either way, right? Either way, it's still on top of all.
It just
of this.
looks a lot better at F. You know, it makes me a lot happier.
Okay. But yeah, this is our general tier list. Can't wait to be proven wrong by the comments and by the results. But the last time we did a tier list, Brendan, weren't you guys like nearly exactly accurate as to what it was? It was very close.
Yeah, we were. We were actually 100% accurate.
100% accurate.
But if you want to be 100% accurate, I would swap a few things around here.
Okay.
For sure.
Tell me what you want to do.
I would put Amber Emerald in B tier.
Okay.
Below the
that is actually fair. No. I think this is fair. I think in general there will be way more players that show up to a challenge with this deck, way more than what will show up with this deck. Yeah, so that's fair.
I think Amethyst Steel would get shuffled. I know you think it's a better deck, but it's not going to be played. I think Amethyst Steel would be lower.
I think it's being played more than these. No, I think it's being played more than all of these.
I don't think more than Amber Ruby. No, that's the one I think.
I think it is, but I'll let you have that one.
Bro, I've got 100% track record. So let me think. Blurple below. Yeah, this is so now we have Ruby, Amethyst. Yep. I would lock this in.
I think the bottom 4 of this literally doesn't matter, right? Because the bottom 4,
those are sample size 1 in a 2,000 player tournament.
Yeah. All right, there you have it. This is the Brendan and Kawa tier list. So watch this be the absolute worst one we've ever done, just because Moyen's not on this episode.
No chance.
No chance, right?
No chance.
All right, so I did say that we're going to talk through the Lorca quest, but I think this episode's gone on a little bit. We can maybe briefly mention the top 2 deck lists, but it's basically, Green Steel won the event. Ruby Sapphire came second. funny moment about this tournament, though, I will mention briefly mention, Brendan, is during, I think this was like game 2 or something like that, the Green Steel player played a Pete, and then the Ruby Sapphire player played Vision of the Future. The game was basically over. Like, they played Vision of the Future and then basically gave up. But I'm like, you can't play Vision of the Future after your opponent played Pete. So both players missed this, and the judge sitting right in front of them missed it. I got up out of my caster seat, walked into the feature table room, and told them this wasn't, like, this was missed. And then they were like, okay, yeah, it's fine. Like, the game was over anyways, whatever. And then we're midway casting the next game. And I did appreciate this. I'm not saying this was bad. I just found it was funny that the head judge of the event came from, like, the main floor. And, like, we're trying to cast, but also, like, talking to us, trying to explain the situation. I'm like, yeah, no, I know. Like, I had to go in and tell them that they messed up this P trigger. But it was, I don't know, it was just funny to me, because there are situations where that could be abused. Like, if the red blue player actually still has a chance to come into the game, and it goes on unnoticed, like, that's on both players. So that's not even on the one player that abuses it. If the player who played Pete doesn't realize that the opponent can't play actions, like, that's a warning for them as well, right?
Yeah, that reminds me of, like, the whole Civis cheating thing, where it's like you had a bunch of... Okay, so I can't say, like, 100%, but I would say 99.999% he was not cheating. But you get, like, all these, I don't know, potatoes who have never been around a competitive tournament, or, like, have no self-awareness, that there are so many mistakes that happen in even your most, like, benign game of Lorcana, for the most part, that just go unnoticed because nobody's watching them. And even on stream, there's so many that happen with the judge sitting right there.
Yeah.
And people give no credibility to, like, this stuff being missed. They're like, oh, he's played it a million times. It's like, yeah, so have you. Like, so is even in the Magic the Gathering, the most recent Magic the Gathering Pro Tour, there was, like, some big mistakes in the finals, I believe, with what's his face, the card game savant. But yeah, it's just trading card games are played imperfectly. Like,
from what I've been told as well, I remember Spessy was telling us that, and I guess you don't have to confirm this or not, but I think in general, if you're casting this and something happens, it's better to just say, like, oh, like, if you notice something, it's like, okay, judge might be taking a look at something. It's like, it's better to not hyper focus.
I don't say anything.
Yeah, it's better to not, like, hyper focus on, oh, I think the player really messed up. You know what I mean?
I don't say anything at all, because what's more likely than not is actually that you're wrong. So you're just focused on a lot of things while you're casting. There's, like, an entertainment aspect. There's, like, trying to make sure your host is, like, you know, giving her... So you're, like, managing
getting
a bunch
enough
of, like,
talking time
things.
as well. Yeah,
they're fucking talking in your ear in the thing.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot that's going on, and it's not like it's every time, but it is reasonably likely that you're incorrect. And if you're incorrect about a misplay or about a rules
it looks
error,
really bad. Yeah, it looks really bad.
It's fucking bad. It's like so bad. It's just like, it's like the worst kind of commentary you can do. It's like you're just harping on something that doesn't exist. So yeah, I don't say anything, because, and also that's legitimately not why I'm there.
Yeah,
there was actually
there.
a table. Yeah, there was a table judge sitting right there. Reminds me of this Flesh and Blood story, which I don't even think I could talk about on my Flesh and Blood podcast, or at least it was, like, kind of a no-no. I was casting a tournament, a pro tour, and a player cheated on stream, and I didn't see it. It was like a sleight of hand thing, and they just, like, DQ'd him later. But they didn't tell me, so he was, like, doing very well in the tournament, and I was sitting in the booth with, I believe, Tan and Grace, so the Lorcana community knows that. He's like, what player are you looking out for? I was like, oh, this player, looking great on this crazy constructed deck. And Brian Gottlieb, who's now, like, the lead designer over there, is, like, sitting behind, he's like, yes, and I'm like, what the fuck is this guy talking about?
Oh my god, he's doing the meme where he's just like, no, yeah.
But I could not even fathom that was what had occurred, too. I was just like, what is this guy doing?
That's pretty funny. But yeah, like, there's nothing too spicy about these decks. Like, there'll be a link in the description if you guys want to check out the deck list. I'm not going to pull them up on screen. The only bit of spice is there's 2 Lucifer in the Emerald Steel deck, which I spoke to the player about this. Their thought process for this card was that they said in their minds, they found this to be a better Ana. They thought it was a better Ana because 90% of the time they reckon that Ana is just used for the discard in this deck. So Lucifer is basically, you're paying the same cost. You're guaranteed to at least discard one of their cards, and many times it could actually be 2 of those cards. So I actually kind of like Lucifer as a bit of an inclusion in this deck. Also allows you to sing. We don't talk about Bruno as well, which is like maybe a little bit relevant. So that inclusion I did like. They went down to one Cove, which I wasn't really a fan of. But I spoke about Cove a lot in terms of it like kind of being a win more card, but then when you get the opener of the Cove, it is absolutely insane that like I think 2 is probably just always the correct number. You don't want to go over 2 because then if you draw like drawing multiple or drawing them even in the mid to late game is like only good in a very incredibly niche scenario where it like protects you against exactly a big legendary Sisu, right, or something like that. But for the most part, the deck list is very, it nearly seems identical to Zan's one. There's just been some alterations where, you know, cut down a Cove, added Lucifers, stuff like that. But yeah. Besides that, again, if you guys want to check out all the deck lists, I do recommend having a proper breeze through this event to see the general meta breakdown and stuff. But as I said, we've been going a little bit long. So without further ado, we're finally going to reveal our set 6 card. I know Brendan is absolutely ecstatic to talk to you guys about this card.
You're the ecstatic one. You were the one that had the leading question. Like, so what do you think about this?
So here it is. It is Mr. Smee, Captain of the Jolly Roger. It's a 6-cost, uninkable, 3/6, Floodborn Villain Pirate Captain within Steel. A quest for 2. It has Shift 4 and the ability Raise the Colors. When you play this character, you may deal damage to chosen character equal to the number of your other pirate characters in play.
Okay. So what I like about it...
What do you like? What do you like about it? I thought you were going to say I like anything.
Yeah. If you're playing the 2-cost Inkable Smee, it has Shift 4, so that's when you have 2 damage counters on your Smee, so that's cool. You can transfer your Smee that's about to leave play into a 3/6 that's actually going to maybe 2-for-1 something on the board. That being said, you know, you compare this card to metagame contemporaries that I guess exist in the ranks, like Mana Medusa. I don't think it's going to be better than Mana Medusa like 99% of the time. And there is potential pirate deck synergy that we can, it eludes our infinite knowledge at this point of all the pirates in Lorcana. So yes, that could exist. And I think that's where this would be at home. I think it's going to be like some sort of mid-range threat. I mean, I think there's a non-zero where it's like, okay, Mr. Smee is a very, very good 2-drop. And now instead of playing like a bad pirate, you can potentially shift it into this on turn 4. And yeah.
I mean, you just compared this to Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, and it's a really bad card. Like, it's not ink. I mean, this not being inkable is really, really tough on it.
It's a pirate card fundamentally. Like,
yeah.
I don't think this is a mid-range card. I don't think it's going in any deck that's not doing pirate stuff. So
it's also sad that it says deal damage to chosen character equal to the number of your other pirate characters in play. So this can't even come into play and just like deal 1 damage to something, you know.
Oh man, I actually love that you pointed that out. I would have. I wish I could go back in time so I could sit as a fly on the wall when they were designing this card, and they were like,
"Oh, we need to be other pirate." Yeah.
We got to take that down.
It's too powerful.
Take that down.
Yeah.
You know, Flaversham with his fucking popsicle sitting on the sides, being like, "No, too powerful.
Yeah.
Too powerful."
Yeah. I don't know. Yep. I mean, it's maybe a couple of sets, maybe some pirate synergy, but even so, like the pirate deck, in my opinion, that this would have to see playing would have to be filled with so many other good pirate cards, like absolutely insane pirate cards for this to make the cut, right?
I think Lorcana is like one of the few TCGs out there, outside of course Magic, who has like a casual format. They could have more casual ways of playing the game where people either play it via multiplayer, and a lot of the multiplayer TCG experiences are based around deck identity. Like that's what Commander is. More than a multiplayer game, it's like a deck identity game. And I don't mind like support coming into the game for that. So like while the tribal pirate deck might never be competitive, you know, you can build a let's say in the future you can build a multiplayer deck that is pirate based. Like that's cool, that's fun, and there's a lot of cards that come out in the set, and I'm happy for a portion of them to be, you know, sent that way. Because let's be real, when you have a trading card game expansion, 90% of the cards in there are garbage.
Going back to the
metagame.
Do you remember the classic that we used to say in Podcana, Brendan? The phonetic bulk, set 3 bulk, right?
Yeah, set 3 phonetic. Does he still do content creation? Called the most impactful set of all time.
I think he's Spessie's editor now, actually. Yeah. Which is funny. Yeah. So.
Yeah, set 3 ended up being pretty impactful.
Yeah, which is quite hilarious now. But
and he deleted. The reason why I bring that up is he deleted that tweet after like 10 minutes, and then
peaced out, I guess. Right? Yeah.
He's just like, I'm not getting past that one.
Yeah. All right. Funny. So yeah, thanks everybody for watching and listening to this week's episode of the podcast. If you guys want to support the podcast, number one thing you can do is leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those podcast platforms. There is a video version of this available over at youtube.com/@Podcana podcast. Hit the subscribe while you're there. Twitters are @Kawatek_CG and @Brendan APG, I do believe.
Yeah. I'll see if I can get an affiliate link for my Bazaar account for you guys.
No. If I'm editing this video, I'm putting I'm getting my affiliate link in there. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.